Hey, thank you guys for showing up and participating in this panel, and I'm going to turn it over to Lily.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for coming. Well, as you just heard, my name is Lelania Dubois, and I am really excited and honored to be here today. My mother was a midwife, a back to the lander, a cannabis community member in Trinity County, and my father was a leader in public service in San Diego. And I really have spent most of my life trying to bridge the gaps between those two worlds. And there were gaps caused by a drug war that instilled decades of trauma and mistrust. As we moved from, or as we move actually, from a clandestine culture in cannabis towards a mainstream industry, we are seeing policies and businesses fail due to these gaps. We are losing generations of knowledge, genetics, and sustainable technologies around cannabis when the world needs it most. We are losing in building a new tomorrow. Today, we're here to discover ways to fill those gaps made by the drug war, to build a bridge between the new and the old, to see if we can ignite new solutions to bring to our industry together. I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Daniel Stein, the co-founder of Bryceland Forest Farms, a multi-generational regenerative farm in Humboldt County. We have Lisandro Salazar, CEO of Arcata X, the first licensed extraction facility in Humboldt County. We have Guy Rocourt, co-founder and chief product officer of Papa and Barkley, a company that has effectively integrated into the legacy communities and built a successful company. And Omar Figueroa of the law offices of Omar Figueroa, an attorney who has spent much of his career defending the cannabis legacy holders. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Welcome. Would you all just kind of say a quick hello before we dive into our questions?
Top of the morning.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Hello. Nice to see all y'all out there.
Oh, it's good to see you all here. So I wanted to start us out with kind of showing how we all come from different experiences, but here we are in this journey around legalization. And I know some of you were in cannabis before we had legal, and some of you weren't. But now we all are. We're all a part of this new mainstream industry. And so I was hoping that we could start by sharing with each other, what was that moment or that experience that happened that made you go, okay, this is where I belong. This is where I'm going to heal myself. This is where I'm going to start my businesses and feed my families, because all of you are 100% in the game. And I think by hearing those stories, we'll understand a lot about each other. Guy, would you like to start? You're at the top of my screen there.
Sure, thank you. Wow, it's an interesting question because I've definitely had several evolutions and have been blessed to be in the cannabis game for quite some time. My aha moment started back in 1998. I had just moved to California to work for Paramount Pictures. I was in entertainment. I was luckily working for Montel Williams, so I was also doing advocacy. But after about a year in Paramount, and I was also starting to have like a little hobby grow. I had a friend who had Crohn's disease that at that time didn't even want to get a script. And I was like, I'll get a script, no problem. And the Yellow House and some of the original dispensaries in Los Angeles area, I'm going in there. And then of course I'm sharing some of the basic product that I was trying to grow. And at one point I had a choice to redo my contract. It was probably more like 1999, or continue like expanding the small grow that I had. And I thought, hey, the people have voted. I didn't know as much. I was very young then. Seems like forever ago. But I thought, hey, people have spoken around Proposition 215. Eventually, the legislators are going to put some laws around this. Let me start to practice and eventually maybe pursue a license. And I started to feel that passion. Of course, as you know, in California, it took several years before, well, almost 2 decades before we actually actioned and made licensing legislated laws where we could actually build businesses around. And so that was my first aha moment that I was like, I'm committed to this industry. And I dove in head first. And of course, one light becomes two lights, becomes more lights. All of a sudden, I didn't mean to be an outlaw, but I am, and nothing's happening, and we're advocating, and I have to make the choice between feeding my family and having all this great cannabis business and feeling really good about what I'm doing, but understanding that if I speak too much, people could clamp down and I could find myself in jail. It was a very interesting way to raise a family. I look back on it and I'm so happy that I dealt with it, because this is the payoff. My second big doubling down was realizing that the pressure of, the traditional market of, always being afraid was quite difficult. And I rushed and I partnered with some folks in Colorado, got some money together and started a vape pen business there, and learned another lesson about how this fight is going to take a lot of time for us to convince folks. And it's important that we don't just cut bait, secure some investment dollars and start a business and let it settle. We have to be the authors of how this industry looks, and what makes it different from alcohol, makes it different from tobacco. That's still our fight. The folks I partnered with in Colorado didn't have that fight. And so luckily I was blessed to come back to California. We started to institute Proposition 64. But even before that, I got some friends together, got some friends and family, invested money to build Papa and Barkley, even if it was going to be under the 215 guys, because I wanted people that were willing to build the right cannabis industry, even under penalty of law. And then, of course, luckily Proposition 64, which is not perfect, came through. And now we're working on that. And I'm blessed to just at least, it's one thing to have a business, but we also need to have an industry that reflects our values and not let it be steamrolled and adapted to look like CPG, or adapted to look like alcohol, or adapted to look like tobacco.
Thank you. Daniel.
Hey, I don't know that I'm even at this moment, years into it, fully invested in the legal market. I'm being dragged along kicking and screaming. My journey with cannabis started when I was very young. Both of my parents grew cannabis here in Humboldt and used that financially as a vehicle to further their career goals and find other paths in life. Myself, after graduating high school and attending some college, I moved back to my home in Hawaii, where I grew up after being born here in Humboldt, and I started pursuing farming, vegetable farming there in Hawaii, and also was self-medicating and enjoying and recreating with cannabis, and you can't really buy cannabis on a farmer's farmhand salary. So I started growing cannabis there and loved it. And I'd say that was the first aha moment where I was like, I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. This is great. The joy you can bring, that I was bringing to my friends, to people that I was sharing with, was amazing. And I spent about 4 years there in Hawaii, just modestly growing enough to support myself and fix my truck and buy a surfboard and all that kind of stuff, until I moved back to my family homestead here in Humboldt in 2000. And while pursuing education at Humboldt State University and fixing up the homestead, I continued to go grow cannabis under the 215 law. And the real transition for me into the regulated cannabis market came around the time my son was born, which is 4.5 years ago, 2016. My wife and I didn't want to live a lifestyle that passed on that kind of trauma of black market cannabis to our children. It's something I had some of myself from when I was young. I see in our community, and I wanted, I was proud of what I did, and I wanted our children to be able to be proud of what we did, and be able to share that with the world. So we, with a lot of hemming and hawing and hard decision making, chose to enter early on into the compliance in Humboldt County, and it feels like it's aged me about 10 years in the last 4 years. One of the things that has been a big motivation for me in life is to pursue things outside of the standard bureaucratic system. I think all of us here would recognize the ways in which our culture has failed us, and the ways in which it limits our human potential to do things, and limits the possibilities. And my motivation has been around exploring my own creativity and doing things myself, from building a homestead and a house to farming. And so it was with that in mind that we got involved in this regulatory quagmire, I guess. And I'm not entirely against it. Don't get me wrong. I am for regulation of industry, and I saw the true benefit, especially as the cannabis industry got out of hand here in Humboldt, the true benefit of regulating for environmental and social reasons. And I'm seeing more and more of that as I see the creeks flowing better than they have over the last couple of years, and things like that. But yeah, we're on the journey. I'm learning skills I never wanted to learn, and learning to enjoy that challenge, and learning to enjoy the benefits that have come with it, being able to do things like this, being able to talk about our lives, and being able to share our farming practices and learn from others with those as well.
Thank you, Daniel. That's my favorite part of all this. I think we have a lot more to share in our culture than just growing the plant. You know, we've already heard just between you and Guy, amazing strength. So Lisandro, how about you? What would you say is one of the major events or moments or experiences that really brought you into going into the permitting process?
Okay. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Well, before we even jump into the permitting process, actually thinking that cannabis was a way to make a living was kind of a moment I remember actually back at Reggae on the River, about 15 years ago, actually. And up until that point, I was a heavy cannabis consumer, cultivating specifically for being able to consume for free and to be able to play with the strains and just kind of not have to buy stuff from other people. And so I didn't really know what was going on in Humboldt until I kind of peeked in via Reggae, and you know, at a couple camps, volunteer camps, and listening to people being like, oh, are you going to go up to this farm after this or that farm after this? I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, oh, well, we're going to go work for the next 3 to 4 months straight. Like, work? What are you guys going to be doing? It's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, we're going to be trimming weed. I was like, oh, I know about that. Like, I've done that before, but I had no idea, like, of the actual gravity, like what people were actually doing in those hills back then. So that was the first time that I was like, oh, this could be interesting. And that also happened to be right at the same time that the first kind of economic crisis of my time happened, right around 2007, 2008. And so I was already like, okay, well, this is going to be really tough. Why don't we try this? And that freedom, along with being connected to the plant and being outside, was when I first realized that this could be something more than just smoking for free. And then fast forward, let's say 10 years after having been a trimmer, been a farm manager, built a farm, you know, managed multiple farms, all this stuff, I realized that, you know, in Humboldt County, there was kind of already a very, I wouldn't say like an elite group, but a lot of people have been doing it for a long time in the cultivation space, right? It was like, they already had their properties, multiple properties, all the infrastructure, like all that was pretty set. And you had to have a really high amount of starting capital to get into that realm.
Yep.
Right. And so because manufacturing was something that required a little bit less upfront capital, a little bit more attention to detail, a little bit more engineering, which I had experience with, I kind of looked at that segment of the supply chain as an opportunity. You didn't need a massive property. You could do something in a very small space and just, have the proper documentation to make sure that, you could do things safely. And so that was, 4 years ago. And it was really just seeing a little tiny sliver of possibility in this whole web of, what I thought at that point was impossibility. And that's kind of what brought me to where I'm at here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Omar. How are you?
Hey, good morning.
So how about you? You've been in the middle of a few battles and conversations around this plant, and quite a warrior. What inspired you to go into helping folks?
Well, I guess initially it was my enthusiasm for cannabis. And I remember being a student at Stanford Law School and going to the Enchanted Broccoli Forest, which is a co-op on the Stanford campus that was part of like this hippie tradition that was still at Stanford. They had all these student co-ops, and of course everybody was smoking ganja at all times. And so I remember going over there to buy some cannabis. And my dealer, this woman named Liz, who basically sat around all day like smoking keef, said, "Hey, I got some keef. Do you want to try it?" I'm like, "What's keef?" Because before that, I had gone to college in the East Coast, and the quality of the cannabis was horrible. Like we would get this brick weed that was completely compressed, and it was kind of brown and, just absolutely disgusting from today's standards. But back then, we thought that was amazing. And, we would even like scrape the pipes and scrape the bongs and smoke the scrape because it was in such short supply. And so I remember coming from a land of, complete want to the land of plenty, which was Northern California, where you could get pretty high quality cannabis on the Stanford campus. And so I remember smoking keef for the first time, and it was like, whoa. Like my mind was like fully ablaze with like thoughts and ideas, and like, I was just like, this is awesome, like way better than like alcohol, because before that I had been, going to college back east, and those were like a culture of like heavy alcoholic consumption, and it just wasn't my thing. That never really rang the bell for me. But the second I did keef, I was like, whoa, this is awesome. It's like a huge gong got hit in my head, and I was vibrating on a higher frequency and, making all sorts of connections. And so I thought like, this is really cool. And so I was a cannabis enthusiast, and this guy, Tony Serra, came to the Stanford campus to speak. And, we had a lot of different speakers like Anthony Scalia, all these like corporate lawyers. They're all pretty boring. They weren't like intellectually exciting. But Tony Serra came to campus, and he's talking about defending people who are falsely accused. And he was so excited about what he was doing. And then after his presentation ended, all these law students flocked to him. They're like, "Mr. Serra, can we submit a resume? We want to work with you." And Tony's like, "That's not really how I operate, And so my friends and I, we weren't interested in the job. We wanted to smoke weed with this guy. And so my friend asked him like, "Mr. Serra, do you ever smoke cannabis after 7 p.m.?" And Tony looks at the clock up on the wall, and he's like, "Yeah, it's 7:30. And so he's like, "All right, let's go do it." And so we went to the back to the dorms, Crothers Hall. And so I remember smoking keef with Tony Serra, and like Tony was like doing like these huge clouds of smoke, and unfortunately, because it was keef and it was very explosive, he was also like hacking his lungs out. But that was like a bonding experience. So I had a great time hanging out with Tony and realizing, hey, I could be a lawyer and smoke cannabis, and that's like fun, and I could practice law while I'm high. And so for me, that was like the first time when I really realized like what I could do. And so for many years afterwards, I eventually in 1998, after I met Tony Serra, I became a lawyer. And then for decades, I represented people all across California in 30 different counties, most of them were accused of some version of cultivation and possession for sales, and then something else, transportation, maintaining, whatever it was, multiple felony charges. And because I had been trained by Tony Serra, I had a no snitch policy. So I never represented informants. And so eventually what happened was I became good at what I did because I did it for a long time, and, you know, I could take my show on the road. And so I had like all my custom motions and all my custom attacks, and I would go from court to court, you know, litigating medical marijuana cases. And it was super fun because each day would be different, and no judge could shut me down because I wouldn't be in front of the same judge day after day, like some poor public defender who's always in front of the same judge. And the judge is like, oh, I've seen that motion before, denied again. You know, I've seen that motion, denied. I would take my novel motions to different counties, and the judges would be like, oh, I've never seen this before. And they would take all the cases, you know, for lunch, and they would go study the cases because for them, it would lively them up. Like the old white judges, they love these medical marijuana cases. You know, they're getting kind of old. Their friends are using marijuana. Everybody's kind of talking about it. And so they were definitely interested in it. And so it was a super interesting career, you know, basically waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then driving for 3 hours and making sure eating breakfast, and then being in court by 8:30 or 9 o'clock, you know, sitting in court waiting for my case to be called. A lot of times when my client, like the first, you know, part of the job was get your client out of jail so that they're not in custody. And then the second part of the case was bombard the prosecution with motions so that they're just like, you know, overwhelmed with all these motions that are flying their way. And then eventually they would just give up, and they would give you like a sweet deal or dump the case, dismiss it. And so, you know, I guess what else would I do? Oh, so now the transition from like, you know, living a life that for me was pretty exciting. It was far more lucrative than it is now, because when I was doing criminal defense, people would come up with the money under the mattress to pay for the lawyer, or if the cops had stolen all their money, they had to, you know, probably for the first time in a long time, ask their friends and family for help, because growers were so independent. They hated asking people for help. So I had to tell my clients, like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to talk to mom. You're going to have to talk to grandma, ask for help for the first time in years. And they would do it. And then we would defend the case. They would beat it, or, you know, get a satisfactory outcome. But then, you know, so I was part of an effort to try to change the law back in 2012, and back in 2010, like I was writing initiatives all along, trying to get something better than what we ended up with, which was Prop 64. You know, back in 2016, Heather Burke and I wrote the California Craft Cannabis Initiative, which basically would have empowered artisan cultivators to have streamlined regulation and basically, and I think grow like up to 100 plants anywhere with minimal regulations, you know, which would be true legalization. What we ended up with, which is a checkerboard system where the locals are allowed to ban whatever commercial cannabis activities they feel like, and which has created this, you know, lack of retail outlets across the state, and does not really provide access to adults for something that is purportedly legal. To me, doesn't look like true legalization. You know, we're halfway there. I remember when people were asking me, what do you think about Prop 64? Are you pro or against? And I called it a sideways step in the direction of true legalization, because it wasn't like a direct step in the direction of legalization, but it was better than the current thing, which was, you know, 16,000 felony arrests per year. And a lot of those were like criminal prosecutions. You know, I remember like lots of people were getting busted, and that kept the unregulated market prices up. And, you know, many people, when they got busted, they had their stack of paperwork, and guess what? The stack of paperwork had a bunch of expired recommendations. And so it wasn't perfect. And, you know, it was just a morass. You know, like the few cases I had with perfect paperwork, I was like, bring it on. Let's go to trial right away. We're not waiving time for nothing. But most cases, did not have perfect paperwork. There was like, and sometimes it wasn't my client's fault. The cops would disappear the paperwork. The cops would disappear wedding rings from safes and money from safes and drugs, and they would disappear all sorts of stuff.
It is definitely right now, our industry is a mess, right? That's we can all agree with that, which I think is part of why we're all here, is like, let's figure out some ways to create solutions, because, the big people aren't making the money they anticipated. I don't know about communities, the more urban areas, but I know the legacy communities up here are falling apart. We're not I came to the table for legalization, not because I wanted to have a big farm, but because I wanted to stop the oppression that I and so many others were experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, one thing I'm hearing
the mess I would add is like 600 pages of mess. That's like the current extent of California cannabis laws. It just maddens me, like how complicated it's become, and that a book is even necessary. It's just ridiculous.
It is. Will we approach this, there's a lot of oppression and there's a lot of fear and a lot of trauma. And I think a lot of our moves in the past few years have been done. And we heard this on the earlier panel around the medicinal conversation, have been made out of fear. And I've seen, in my experience, business deals go bad. I've watched this policy creation go bad because of lack of communication between two very strong parties, which is mainstream and legacy. And what we have right now is the four of you who have very different experiences, yet similar in getting to legalization. And what I'm hoping we can discuss here openly, and maybe we'll get some questions from the audience as well, is what through these experiences, I mean, you have all been through lots of hurdles, to get to where you are. And I know not all of us are there yet, myself included. But what are some of those gaps that you see and ways that you see that we can create solutions to bridge the gaps between these operators, like what Omar was discussing, who have literally, I know people who have 6 generations of experience and genetics around this plant who are giving up. Yet if they were to sit down with a scientist or a really big brand, that scientist and that big brand would elevate immediately with that experience, knowledge, and understanding. Along with, as Daniel mentioned, the way we build community. We've managed to create some really sustainable communities around this plant that are doing well through COVID, that are working together, that have their own foods. Yet we need that business structure to succeed, because money is a tool in this world. So I'm interested to hear from all of you what your thoughts are on that, and ideas of how we can start bridging that. And Guy, maybe we could start with you, because you've really done a really good job in that with Papa and Barkley in Humboldt County. I really appreciated how you've come into the community.
Yeah, look, I think you said it, money is fuel, but we have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of money first. Values always have to come first. Like I said, I made a mistake of once kind of, taking the money and not questioning my partner's values. And so for anybody trying to get in the industry, I think there's a lot of passion now. People in, like, let's say Wall Street, see the money, but what they need is operators to just speak their truth. Never not speak your truth, because it's gonna come back to you in the end. Like, if we're not crystal clear about our agenda, and if you're raising money and part of that money is not for advocacy, and whether it's reforming 64, helping other states, there's a problem. Some of the controversial things I've said recently is that I don't believe in CBD only companies, for instance, because that's not fair. We can't all of a sudden now just separate and pick and choose cannabinoids. I take offense to folks that are selling CBD that say THC free, because that's just adding more to the demonization of cannabis, right? So as we become business owners, or we try to aspire to business, if you're going to get a loan, if you're going to partner with somebody, you have to be grounded in your truth. It's our responsibility as we move from the traditional legacy markets to this more compliant framework that we set the tone for cannabis, right? I have no problem. The way Wall Street works and the way pharma works is they love to look for things like IP. They want to shut the door behind them. They don't want to be inclusive. We see that in some of our other agricultural works. That can't happen to our industry. We can't let our industry be watered down. We need to together hold our skill set. Our skill sets are valuable. You know, a lot of people think they can just come in and grow cannabis, or think that, you know, fractionating oil is the same as fractionating other things, but it's not that simple. Cannabis is nuance. Wellness or the dispensary will never be a liquor store. It'll never be a straight smoking lounge. We have this product that bridges wellness and recreation, and how it's treated is unique and needs to be unique. We need to be the gatekeepers of that. So when people are trying to throw money at the situation, we need to kind of stand up and say, that is not correct. Especially in California, we see a lot of money coming in. A lot of folks are setting up shops where it's branded products that don't reflect or articulate the quality of cannabis products. The way we've built Papa and Barkley is we want to just have truth in cannabis science. That's the first thing, like understanding where the medicine is in the trichomes, understanding that hemp or cannabis are interchangeable words, and the notion that hemp CBD is different than cannabis CBD is some artificial thing that the feds want us to still have strife. It's not the case. We know that there are different varietals. Some varietals might be cannabinoid rich, THC or CBD. Some varietals are going to be great to offset cotton production and so on. So cannabis and hemp are still part of this larger movement of reform, but we need to use our voices to let Wall Street know that the real investment is in truth, because that truth is going to come out. We continue to bury the truth, you're going to have a failed business, right? So yes, I see people on the CBD distillate side making quote unquote hundreds of millions of dollars, but that's not sustainable, because whole plant cannabis medicine is exactly that, whole plant cannabis medicine. What got us here is things that we grew in our garage, things we made in our kitchens. Those simple formulas still need to be honored, codified, that nomenclature, just like wine does, around the tiers of quality cannabis, going from whether it's a refined distillate product all the way to a true just solventless hash with bundles of trichomes. We need to do that. We need to do that work so that as people do invest in our community, they understand what the rules are. What is good cannabis? Right now, we have people with money looking for opportunity and not looking to honor our industry, not looking to forward our industry, but just to make a buck. And that's where I think the rub is being able to straddle, I want to make money and be good to my investors, but I also need my investors to know that we are going to spend a portion on advocacy. We are going to do things the right way, even if they're at first more expensive, because it's important for us to build the shelf that our products are being put on. And that's what I tell my investors. Not only am I building this business, which might be doing well, but I'm also building this industry, and the industry has to do well to grow the pie for all of us.
And you know, you should tell investors that advocacy is called insurance. It's the only kind of insurance we have in cannabis, is to be engaged and lead the conversation, like you said. Thanks, Guy. I appreciate that. Do you have any suggestions of how the legacy culture can do that? Because, you know, I think standing by your truth is really important, but from the other side of the conversation, we get a lot of pushback that we stand a little too hard and we're aggressive with our truth. And I've seen really good opportunities at the table that go away when both parties would really like what they could create together. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, you know, I look at it like any other bias, and, you know, as our country goes through understanding legacy of bias, I'm a hard-nosed person. To me, it's tax and regulate like alcohol, period, right? Like anything else is cannabis shame, right? We don't track and trace things that kill people. We think about the past that pharma gets, right? Never mind the past that alcohol gets. In what way is it possible that I can go in, get a half a gallon of, you know, alcohol that potentially could kill me, when I can't go to a dispensary and browse products and touch products that even if I ate everything in the dispensary, I'd probably still be fine, right? Those are real facts that we just need to come to terms with. And so when Sacramento is not licensing folks aggressively under this fear of like, ooh, there might be not enough safe access, or when regulators are focused, I'll give you a Denver example. In Denver, the MED, when I'm so glad we didn't do it this way, were just cops. They were jackbooted thugs looking to ticket dispensaries, ticket manufacturers, just to make money. It was not about public safety whatsoever. I was making vape pens. They didn't come in and look at how clean I was. All they wanted to know was, did I pay my fees? Does everybody have a badge? Money, money, money. At least in California, we're a little bit better, okay? It is a little bit about public safety, but the onus is on Sacramento to until we are taxed and regulated like alcohol, where you can go into a dispensary, touch products, until track and trace is manageable and not prohibitive, right? We're going to always have to stand up for ourselves. So my suggestion is, yes, 64 needs, I like the example Omar gave, kind of like a sideways step, but it was a step, and we now need to continue that momentum and take steps, because now we can talk about this. The thing about 215 is we could not meet like this and talk openly. We could not pool our funds together and start to lobby Sacramento. So that's the power. And like, yes, for those of us who are on the leading edge making some coin now, we need to take a portion of those investment dollars and reinvest in our industry. One thing that I think Kiva's doing, and I've started to pitch it to folks, is if the banking community is going to do it, we need to start funds where we can bridge loans to farmers, whether it's because they need money to pay for their licensing or they need money to plant. We don't need to have farmers become brilliant business people all along. That's not how it works in traditional agriculture. One of the things we're doing as a company is we're making deals with farms. We're starting to pay them before harvest, through harvest, and after harvest, and doing some structured cash flow for them and giving them guarantees. In our third year of doing it at Humboldt, it totally works because we pay our bills, so we're dependable. Yeah. And when we say, hey, we're gonna take these couple of hoop houses and here's a down payment towards it, and then we'll figure out what the yield is, and then we'll finish off the payments in chunks. Now they have some steady cash flow before and after harvest, and they can start to, structure their business, right? So offering business help, offering some kind of community, what do they call that? A credit union of some sort where we can lend money to each other so that we can set up more industry and grow the pie. Those are the kinds of things we can do without waiting for Sacramento or waiting for 280 or the banking system to find us, because it is not fair that you can come up with a solid business plan with real ROI and nobody's gonna lend you money except for some VC person that you don't trust coming from Wall Street. That's weird. So those are just some of my initial ideas right now.
I appreciate them. Thank you. Hey, Daniel, coming from, multi-generational, where do you see that both sides of this conversation can improve to help bridge those gaps so we are all working together?
Well, I don't know. Let me just speak to, what Guy said, Guy said, thank you so much, because he made the point of putting morals ahead of money. And I hear a lot of talk about that having changed with compliance, but putting money ahead of morals was here in the legacy market. It's here now. That's not what's having an effect on our community. Our community was having trouble before the regulated market because there were lots of people living here, developing property entirely just to make money. So there was a whole segment of the population here that wasn't community, that was just an extractive industry. And you see that same thing happening now. And I as far as the solution to that, I think there will always be some of that. And I think, like Guy was saying, it's up to us that want to see something different in the world to choose where we put our energy and our time, and not just put all that we're gaining from being productive in this market back into more profit, but actually putting it into advocacy, putting it into our community, and putting it into what we want to see blossom in the world. And for me, one of the heartbreaking things for me in this community is when it transitioned from the legacy market into the compliant market, those that found the most success were the people that were least community oriented to begin with, because they had built up the capital to make that transition. And the people who hadn't built up that capital because they were building social capital. They grew enough with their time so that they had free time to start radio stations, to be on volunteer fire departments, to raise schools. And so they weren't spending that extra time buying more property, making more money. And the people that were and had that capital are who have blossomed and flourished under this changing industry. And the state of California has helped that to happen by making the burden of getting into this industry too high for small operators. And Omar had talked about that, what him and Heather Burke had worked on. And I think a big part, if we want to see these communities thrive, is figuring out what Guy had talked about metric. That's overburdensome. I run a 5,000 square foot farm. I can't hire somebody to do metric. I can't hire somebody to do compliance. I'm doing all of this myself, and it takes more time away from my farming
Yep.
than it absolutely should for the size farm I have and for the profit I'm able to make. And I know lots of people who aren't able to jump through the hoops that Humboldt County and the state of California has put ahead of them to make $30,000-$40,000 a year to support their lifestyle as homesteaders and community members in our communities. And that's heartbreaking. And to see the disingenuous branding that's happening with people that I've seen, build empires of greed over the years, and now are branding as, back to the land family farms, and to see that support from the state, to see that support from the county, to reinforce that paradigm of success as whoever can gather the most capital. That it's a bigger problem. That's a societal problem right there, is like looking at how we view success. And to me, success is like a gifting economy. How much do you have to give back to your community? How much do you have to give back to making the world a better place?
That's
And
a good point.
it's, for me, hopefully, and part of what we're counting on is the being genuine, connecting to consumers who want to support that in the world, and speaking our truth clearly and supporting others that do, so that the consumers that not only want a quality product but want to support people doing things in a quality way have that option. And other than that level of education and advocacy towards changing the laws to support smaller farmers, smaller businesses being successful, I don't know, get out there and be a good person in society and hope you influence some people to be better people.
Yeah, I'd like to underscore, Lele, the educational piece. That is I didn't mention that, but as our company, as Daniel pointed out, our marketing and your marketing dollars should be spent first on education. Most people who had scripts who know cannabis, they know cannabis, but we need to speak to the newbies. At P&B, we often say we like to own that first cannabis conversation. We should all be focused on that first cannabis conversation. We are indoctrinating people, and we have an opportunity to indoctrinate them in the right way. One is around plant-based medicine, a larger green movement in terms of just holistically looking at the world, but spending your advertising dollars on like that educational piece to educate people about good cannabis. And like, I don't want to use the trigger term like cancel culture, but calling out folks who are just not doing it correctly is also kind of part of the duty, because at this point we unfortunately have let things go too far. And now it's not finger pointing, but silence is a little bit not good. Like, not using your voice now is not cool anymore. The situation has gotten dire, so you have to use your voice. And that's just not for cannabis, that's just in general. If we don't speak our values because we're frustrated or because we don't think we're going to be heard, that's not helping anything. We have to speak our values, period. And we have to educate on our values. And if you can't use education as a platform for advertising your business, you are probably not doing it correctly.
Thank you. Yes, I think I really feel like with all this digital information now and COVID, we've really kind of busted through a level of where there is going to be a lot of accountability in branding and product development. You're no longer going to be able to infuse CBD in shaving cream and get away with it and throw a label on it.
What about a goat wearing suspenders?
There you go. There you go. Oh, I haven't seen that one, Omar.
That's the Lowell Urco with an invented history of, Mr. Lowell, who allegedly used to consort with the undesirables back in the day.
Well, I've never actually tried that brand, so I can't speak to it, Omar. So, Lizandra, where, you've kind of been in different corners through this experience. Where do you see are some places that we can help bridge these gaps right now?
So I think first identifying what makes legacy farmers unique is super important, right? And there's a few different ways that you can really quantify that to the end consumer, and they're very sensual ways, right? Flavors and smells, pictures of farms with butterflies and flowers, and that's the emotional side of things, where when I bring clients to Humboldt, I usually don't take them to the monocrops that are flat next to the other monocrops. I like to take them to beautiful places, and I like to tell them the story about how the farms got there. And so number one is just kind of creating that story of like, this isn't just like an ag commodity. This is something that interacts with the ecosystem. And so being able to not only tell the story, but then show through some science, through some data, through tests, right? Hey, look at this diversity of terpenes from this farm grown in this way with this type of compost tea. Look at the percentage of terpenes by weight that this farmer seems to get every single year without bringing inputs into the farm. That's got monetary value, right? How about this genetic? When was the last time you saw this genetic on the menu? Oh, never? Yeah, because it's only in this region and it never leaves, right? So like knowing now that is, when I'm procuring, that is exactly what I'm looking for. And that typically correlates to the legacy farmers who are just out there doing their own thing, right? And let's not forget, a lot of the high CBD genetics actually came from Southern Humboldt, right, with Ringo. So I actually, the tea-free conversation is one thing, but I almost see CBD as the Trojan horse for THC in the national and global marketplace. And you better believe that the people who are coming and investing in CBD right now know that the prize is really in the THC. They just can't do it yet because they're going to get in trouble. So it's a little different. I see it a little bit different than Guy actually, but it's all true, right? There's people who are racing to the bottom. At the same time, there's people who are racing to the top, right? It's like there isn't one way that it's happening. It's happening both at once. And so which side are we going to be on, right? We're more of holding our prices where they need to be, not trying to fluctuate too crazy, not being reactionary with our pricing, having buffers in place so that we know, hey, this specific product that we procured from this specific place that we paid a price that was higher than market for, we're holding on this. And you know what? You're going to be able to show the consumer why it's so much better as long as you educate, right? As long as you take the time to ask them, well, how do you feel now versus this other thing that you might have gotten from a place that maybe just didn't have the same practices. And, this is a psychoactive plant. It's not a commodity. And so, there's a lot more depth to it. And therefore, I think there's a lot more depth that the legacy people have gained over time because it's become ingrained in themselves. So that to me is just how I like to position myself when it comes to bringing value to my friends and my family, the people who might even be struggling, but they know, hey, if I keep doing it the way I've always done it, people will notice at some point. And so I want to be that voice for them. I want my buyers to also have that voice when they're selling to the retailers and so on and so forth. So that's my position on that for sure.
So you've done a great job. Lizandra and I get to play in the cannabis playground together a little bit. And, one of the things that I really appreciated about you, coming from where you come from with the farms and stuff, is that you are integrating science and technology into understanding why, right? What made you, I think the question is, what made you do that? Because we have so much IP, as Guy mentioned, yet how do we prove that IP, right? And maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, knowing also that, we don't have to all do it all of ourselves. There's all these other people in other industries that have done these kinds of things before that are trying to jump in and support us. You know, we're working with data scientists from Israel who use machine learning algorithms to understand unstructured data in a way to pull takeaways. And I cannot do that. Like, that is not my core competency. But bringing in some of these people who have been champions for the good in other industries, and then listening to what they have to say, and then trying to weave in some kind of, you know, takeaway from that so that you can explain it in simple ways. I would really just say, you know, looking to other, you know, having the conversations, but looking to some other industries and other companies that are bringing some of this amazing technology, and trying to make sure that there's some guardrails there so that it doesn't all go, you know, straight to profit margin. There's other things in, you know, the conversation. Not sure if that answers your question, but that's just what came
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It looks like I call it putting the potluck together. It's a new kind of potluck. You know, we need a lawyer, we need someone who knows, you know, branding, and what a lot of people in the legacy side know is the plant. So
But,
Omar,
if I could just comment on that. Yeah, look, one of the things that we've had to wrestle with is, as we call it, professionalizing our organization. We've gotten folks that, I'm resistant to hiring folks that don't have passion for the plant, but as we got bigger, it's gotten more difficult. So around like lawyers, our HR department, some of the systems we've put in, we have gone to outside folks who have built businesses before, scaled folks, you know, but it's important that they view our culture ourselves. I really like Lisandro's point about going to beautiful places. We make it a point to fly everybody up here to Humboldt, visit with farms, and we try to go to the Emerald Queen farms. We try to go to to Sunrise Mountain farms. We try to go to these farms that are like in the hills, so they have the real experience. Last year, it was a joke. We had a big harvest tour where we brought a bunch of people, and of course, we're the idiots with all the like black SUVs going through the hills, freaking people out because we looked like the police. And it was like, what are you guys doing?
The feds are in town.
It is important that if you come from a traditional market and you're bringing a skill set, yes, we need to, some traditional rules apply in terms of business, in terms of scaling, in terms of how HR works, how payroll works, and all those things. And as your crew grows, our crew now over the state is about 160 people. That's a large organization to manage, but we indoctrinate each one of these folks. You don't have to use cannabis, but you do have to understand the shame and the bias that is put on cannabis. And you do have to realize that whether you're a lawyer, whether you're HR, whether you're in finance, that you have to be part of our fight, because there's stumbling blocks in everywhere. Every single department in our company has an outside stumbling block. Our lawyers have to deal with craziness. Our finance people have to deal with craziness. Our salespeople have to move through the world in a different way. Of course, we're hiring salespeople that come from alcohol, or we're looking at a guy that worked at Pepsi. You know, well, those folks, they were much freer to access and distribute and sample. They have to learn our methodology, and they also have to learn that this methodology that 64 has put on us is an onus, and we have to fight back against it, and we have to look for loopholes, and we have to continue to push back on what's not right. And they're just not coming for a job. They're coming to be an advocate in an industry that we're growing. So when we do get this outside talent, we have to make sure they're seeing it through our lens. If we make the mistake, which I think a lot of companies do, it's like, oh, that guy's a professional, he knows how to build an industry, and we don't indoctrinate them into our values, that's where the problem starts.
And on that note, I think there's social purpose corporations, there's B Corps, benefit corporations. You know, there's corporate structures where somebody can basically build in their mission that goes beyond merely maximizing quarterly profits for shareholders, which I think is such a myopic vision for the future, into something that is a little bit more long-term.
Thank you, Omar. You know, you get to work, we just have a few minutes left, but I would like to hear from you, Omar, a little more on this subject, because you have worked with so many of the traditional market operators. And I don't know about your county, but in my county, I just learned that we have, the numbers are inconsistent, but it's about 600 to 1,000 licensed operators in Humboldt County, when I know when I was very engaged in the policy conversation, we were saying we had over 10,000 215 or SB 420 operators. How do you see ways, and policy is a very obvious answer, but do you see other ways that we can help these operators get through?
Well, given the existing legal and regulatory landscape, talking about something that's currently being proposed, that would be Senate Bill 67. And this deals with super important appellations of origin. We're going to see the world's first appellations for cannabis, and they're being proposed in California. And so once the regulations are finalized, and we're waiting any day now because the deadline is by the end of the year, there's going to be the final regulations to submit a petition in order to establish a new appellation of origin. And that's going to require 3 or more licensed cultivators to basically propose the geographical boundaries and the standards, practices, or cultivars that define the appellation of origin for cannabis. So I think appellations are really the way they're going to be defined, and the way Senate Bill 67 talks about them. It says an appellation of origin shall not be approved unless it requires the practice of planting in the ground in flowering areas and excludes the practices of using artificial lighting and structures in flowering areas. And so basically this will tie down the product to the land so that whatever is produced is an expression of the place, because you could grow using the exact same techniques in another part of the world and it's not going to turn out the same because it doesn't have the same microbiome, it doesn't have the same living soil. So this is a way to use what's happening outside the United States, which are these appellations of origin. And there's a treaty that WIPO recognizes, and there's a whole system that the US is not yet a signatory to, but could easily become a signatory to, because it would add value everywhere throughout the supply chain. Instead of having, well, you would basically have internationally recognized appellations of origin for cannabis. And so that's where this system is headed. And there's been a lot of work with the International Cannabis Bar Association to really come in and put in a terroir-driven definition for appellations. And what's important about terroir is that it doesn't really allow for exploitation because the value is in the land and it's in those characteristics that are unique to the land. And so you have to preserve the environmental conditions in order to have that same expression. It requires environmental planning and conservation and sustainability. So I really like this concept just because so much is built into terroir-driven appellations, but that's where cannabis appellations are headed. I feel, I've thought about it, and I've also, I'm privileged to work with some clients who want to establish appellations, and they're old school, at the intersection of Humboldt and Trinity and Mendo counties. And so I'm excited to start working on that project because I think appellations are super important in this twisted landscape. Even once we re-legalize cannabis, we should still have appellations, and we could have even stronger terroir-driven appellations. But that's something I'm excited about right now.
Yeah, I am too. I need to look into it more because I've also heard that people own appellations and it's an opportunity for corporate takeover as well. But I think
an entity could own the appellation. That's probably the better way to structure it, rather than having like a bunch of individuals fighting over it later. Once it becomes an established appellation, it becomes valuable, and the seal of approval becomes like a very valuable thing. So so you can have like an unincorporated association, or you can also have like a nonprofit running the appellation. So there's different ways to structure it. That's what makes it so interesting. You can also have a social purpose corporation that's a hybrid for-profit, but which also has the environmental preservation goals, which will allow the appellation to exist indefinitely, in perpetuity, as we say in law.
Yeah, hey, Lele, I think this is a great time to highlight, like, there are some organizations like ACGA, and, it's important for us. Look, I'll use my personal example. We are coming out into the light, but we need to step fully into the light, start giving time to these associations, because if we don't step out and self-regulate, somebody else will do it. And so when we think of the ACGA owning the appellation and being the body that designs the rules and goes out, inspects farms to give that seal of approval, that's super important. We see it on the, whether it's Bordeaux or Champagne, there are archetypes for why this is great. And Omar has a good point. we have a genetic here. How it expresses here will be different from Western New York, different from Spain. And I think that is the ultimate future. This is not saying that you can't use supplemental lighting, you can't do this, but we need to have a certain portion where we have like a level playing field. If I grow wedding cake, they grow wedding cake in Amsterdam, they grow wedding cake in Spain, and we get together for a competition, what makes those things different is the land, right? And the practices that are agreed on for that appellation, just like wine. So again, here's another no-brainer that's being difficult for us because a lot of the sticking points are around people, even in the industry, having personal cannabis shame as if we could never be this professional, or more importantly, we don't deserve it. We deserve it and it's ours for the taking. And it starts with each industry member realizing that being part of a professional industry group like the ACGA or whichever group that you want to be part of is important, right? Other industries do that. We have yet to contribute not only personal resources, but financial dollars to these groups to give them the authority to self-regulate us.
So I want to make a brief correction, Guy. It's not HCGA, it's ICFA that is leading and gotten the grant money for this project that we're talking, the Appellation Project. Just to clarify with the organizations.
And
well,
shout out to the Origins Council, as well as Janine Coleman, who's you know, really led the fight, and Justin Calvino, who helped come up with the idea, and Robert Stefano, who also has been propounding it for a long time. So. You know,
yes, and I think in Trinity, it's Trinity County Ag Alliance, Trinity County Ag Alliance, International Cannabis Farmers Association, and then Origins, like you mentioned, are really who's making it happen. Well, any last words? We have about 2 minutes left, panel. Is there anything you would like to say to our audience before we go?
Our work is not done yet. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and we have to honor their efforts by continuing them. And so cannabis is not yet legal. It still has to be legalized, and that task lies before us. We really have shown that cannabis can be legalized, and the sky has not fallen. And so a lot of the hype that the legalization folks used to parrot is no longer credible. And so now we can take the full step and fully legalize. And I'm really glad to hear, people say that they want to devote, some of the earnings from their entrepreneurial efforts into terraforming a more hospitable landscape for everybody, because I think that's good for business and it's good for creating an abundant and prosperous future.
Nice, thank you. Lisandro.
Yeah, I mean, just remember it's a very cyclical marketplace. So, it could be the sky is falling one week and the next week it could be like, oh my God, it's never been better than this. So, just try to keep that steady state. Always know that, we don't know what to expect with this, but, as long as we can maintain that endurance really, and keep those values front and center, I think we'll all be okay.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I would just conclude with how we started. Stay true to your values. Stay true to the plant and your communities above all else, and goodness will follow.
Thank you. Guy?
Yeah, I'd like to share our company's mission, and I think it's really everybody in cannabis mission, and that's unlocking the power of the plant to improve people's lives. We instill that in all our folks. I can feel it here. It's like, we have this plant, we know it's powerful. We've been kind of amateur on it for the last 40, 50 years. I look at this as the second cannabis revolution. Clearly the folks, in the late 60s and 70s were close. I'm still boggled. I think I'm a smart person. I don't understand why cannabis got so demonized and how far the misinformation went, but we are now starting to retard that and take the steps. And so we are all on this mission to unlock the power of cannabis to improve people's lives. As Daniel said, it's like our values need to come first. This is about improving people's lives. Like, again, cannabis is not like alcohol. It's not, even when we use the term recreation, it's like, really? Are we just really relaxing, communing with each other, socializing? Like, cannabis has so many great values, but we can't see it clearly because of all the misinformation that's kind of cluttered it, all the bias. And now's the time to kind of step out of that. Really, if you believe it and you feel it, speak it. Don't be ashamed. Don't think that, like, just because other people that seem learned know more. No, hold your values, put those out first. let the plant speak through you, and others will eventually listen. It may have taken 40 years, but we're finally now on this upward trend where more and more people are finally starting to realize, oh, wait, there is real truth in cannabis medicine.
Thank you, Guy. I agree. And I just want to add and say thank you for everybody for tuning in, and for our panelists participating, and for Susan for making this amazing platform that not only now, you know, you've brought so many people together in real time, but now digitally. And I want to add that, you know, you've heard a lot about how the legacy players can engage. And I want to bring up that any mainstream or new industry players, you know, really the way to build the best product, to build the best grow room, and to build the best company in this business is to integrate with legacy players and pull them into your teams. You know, we understand how those cannabinoids work. We understand how those environments work, and we understand how this community works. So thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, Lily. Thank you, panelists. It was amazing, and it will be available. The video will be available by Monday, and I'll make sure to get it to you. I am going to, if you guys could stick around for a little bit to answer some of the questions that weren't able to be answered, and go into the chat with all of your contact information. I'm going to change you to an attendee and bring in my next panelist. So next up,
I'm doing harvest for farmers market right
Yeah.
now.
okay.
Daniel, I'll post your email in the chat.
Yeah, and like our Instagram and stuff would be great. And it was really a pleasure, all of you. What a stellar group of people.
Thank you, Dan.
so much.
I hope to come visit soon again.
Anytime.